This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 434, Talking Drupal. This episode of Talking Drupal is sponsored by Hero Devs. On today's show, we are talking about this show, and we will also cover Autosave Form as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our guest today is Stephen Cross. Stephen is the founder of Talking Drupal. Welcome back to the show, and thank you for joining us.
I'm so honored to be the guest today. Thank you for having me.
I'm Nick Laughlin, founder at Enlightened Development, and today my co-host is John Picozzi, Solutions Architect at EPAM.
Howdy.
And now to talk about our module of the week, let's turn it over to Martin Anderson-Klutz, a senior solutions engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of Drupal modules of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, Nick. Have you ever wanted an autosave feature on your Drupal site's forms so content creators won't lose their work if they accidentally close the window or lose power? There's a module for that. It's called Autosave Form, and it was created in November of 2016 by Hristo Chonov of WinX Internet, who is also one of the organizers of this year's Drupal Dev Days in Burgos. It has an 8.x-1.4 version available, which works with Drupal 9 and 10, and it is actively maintained. In fact, the most recent commit to the branch was less than 3 months ago. It does have test coverage, and it has 38 open issues, 20 of which are bugs, which is pretty good considering the module is in use by over 6,400 sites, according to Drupal.org. Now, the module works by automatically saving the content of the current form every 60 seconds, though the time period is configurable. When a user opens a form, if an autosave state exists for that form, a dialog will be shown asking if they want to resume editing or discard any autosaved states. Once a form is submitted, any saved states will be automatically deleted. And it's worth pointing out that it should work with both content entity forms and config forms, but the majority of development and testing has been with entity forms in mind. The project page also mentions an issue with nested entity reference inline forms and has links to relevant core issues. Also worth noting that this module uses Ajax to save the states to the Drupal database, separate from any entity revisions. Now, if you would prefer a solution that saves form states into the browser's local storage instead, you can check out the Save Form State module, which uses the jQuery Sisyphus plugin. Now let's talk about Autosave Form.
Auto-saving. I mean, I guess my question here is like, are people a fan of it? And if so, why?
I'm not a fan of it, so I'll start there. Like, it reminds me of like working on a Mac versus working on other operating systems, where when you work on a Mac, it's auto save by default. Anytime you type something in a document, everything's auto saved all the time, and that is always something that frustrated me. Even in my VS Code, I turn that feature off if it exists because I always want to control when I save something. So, but that's me. I could see how this could be valuable to somebody.
I think it's an interesting question because I feel like years ago there was some kind of a desktop publishing software. I think it was like one of the Adobe products that would do a similar thing where it would sort of have a separate autosave state. And then if you crashed or something like that and you relaunch the program, it would be like, hey, there's a save state. Do you want to go back to that? So I feel like this works sort of like that. I think ironically, probably most of us are used to using software that actually autosaves by default, which is things like Google Apps, where as soon as you make a change, it automatically saves those. And so it's actually doing a real autosave all of the time, not just sort of this like restore state the way Autosave Form does.
For me, it kind of depends on the product. I mean, I'm the opposite, Stephen. The first thing I turn on for VS Code is autosave because I mean, I use Git to store points in time that I want to save. But when I'm working on something, I want to be able to just refresh the page and see what's changed. Video games is another one. Like if a video game doesn't have autosave in general, that's particularly annoying because you can lose a lot of progress. But on websites, I've installed this, not this particular module, but modules like it a couple of times. And I found that if you have any sort of nested comment, which you mentioned in your preview, things can really get funky pretty quickly. So usually the people that want autosave have really complex architectures, and it's usually not going to work very well for them anyway without a significant amount of work. So I try to avoid it in Drupal where possible, but I can see why some people would like it.
I was just gonna say, I'm kind of with Steven. I'm kind of also with Nick. I guess if it works well and it's not a blocker, right, to folks, then great, more power to you. I will also say the video game analogy is interesting to me, because even if a video game has autosave, when I'm done with or I'm at a point where I'm stopping or moving on, I still save it anyway, because I don't necessarily always trust the autosave has autosaved. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I guess I'm mixed on it. I kind of feel like it's, if I can make that point in time to say I'm going to save this. I also wonder like what the resource usage is on like saving, like if you're saving every 5 seconds or 10 seconds or, that sort of thing. Like, is that more of a resource impact on your web server?
Well, according to the product page, it actually uses sort of a separate save mechanism specifically to make it sort of a lighter load on the web application. To respond to one thing Nick said, I think that's an interesting point about, people maybe wanting this on more complex applications, because to me, if anything, I would see probably the ideal use case for this being some kind of a system, maybe even like an intranet or a portal, where you've got a lot of users who are probably less technically sophisticated, or maybe could be expected to have a lower level of training. And so they might be more likely to, do some work and then close the window without, scrolling down to the save button or something like that.
Yeah. I think like the thing that comes to mind when you say that, Martin, is like, and this is not necessarily editing content, but the block menu. Like, how many times has somebody moved a block around or moved a couple of blocks around and then left the block layout page and then been like, oh, I forgot to hit save, right? That kind of likens to me in the content world to like paragraphs, right? You've managed a couple of paragraphs, you've forgotten to hit the save button because you have nested paragraphs and you're like, oh, I saved them out, right? So like there, I think it could be helpful where like you're doing that type of content change where it's like, hey, it may not be obvious to the person that they also need to hit the save button at the bottom.
Ironically, that paragraphs example sounds like it might be a case where this module actually doesn't work yet. So
so
because of the nested entities,
it wouldn't save the content type after like at some point. Like that's not like, I'm not saying it would save the paragraph, right? Like, oh, I'm on a paragraph, it's going to know to save that. I'm saying like the overall page that you're on editing that paragraph, right?
I think so, but it'd be interesting to know, if anybody has experience to maybe talk about it in the Talking Drupal channel on Drupal Slack.
Yeah, and I was going to ask what happens if you hit cancel.
It saves your changes anyway.
Yeah.
Are you like, well, Steven,
I moved these 5 blocks around, but you know what? Actually, I didn't want to do that. Sorry. Let me start again.
No, it auto saved 1 second before you reloaded the page. Yeah. So you're host. That's actually a great use case too, if you think about it. Like, how often do you edit a page and then go, oh wait, maybe I don't want to do it this way, exactly, and then reload the page? Now, if you've auto saved it, you're kind of like, you got to rely on revisions at that point, right?
Yeah, that's my question. Exactly. Yeah.
No. I think you guys are misunderstanding slightly. So autosave saves a state of the change that you've made, but it doesn't publish them. It's just that if you make some changes, leave the page and come back, it'll say, hey, somebody was editing this. Do you want to start from where they were, or do you want to start over?
Oh, so it's doing it's doing a browser save, not a Drupal save.
No. This particular project places it in the database, but not in the node field database. It uses a separate cache. It's essentially caching the changes you've made.
Gotcha. But it's caching them to the database.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. All right. So if I didn't hit save, they're not published to the node. Got it.
No, and if you come back in, it will ask you if you want to start from
Got
where
it.
that
No,
person
okay,
was
so that
or
makes
start
sense.
over.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I'm with
John's
you.
making a funny face. So
Sorry, I am. I'm like,
I actually like this. This is a good idea.
I'm trying to wrap my head around it now because I'm like, okay, so if I
we're sorry, John. We're learning that 2 of the 3 hosts don't listen to Martin's intros because you said this. That's why
I was listening. I guess I just had thought that it would automatically save the page as if I had hit the publish or the save button at the bottom of the content, not in some sort of like draft state that I could go back to, which I mean, I guess is nice.
I think the particularly fun part too is that there's 3 modules called Autosave Form.
With different spaces in different places, right?
That's going to be a show. That's going to be a show topic at some point, like naming your module.
Well, thank you, Martin. If our listeners want to get in touch with you and have ideas for other modules of the week, how can they do that?
You can definitely reach out with a suggestion in the Talking Drupal channel in Drupal Slack, but they can also reach me with a direct message, anything Drupal or anything social as @manclue.
Awesome. Thank you. This episode of Talking Drupal is sponsored by Hero Devs. Let's talk about life after Drupal 7 end of life. Since August 2023, there's been a lot of discussion around Drupal 7's official end of life in January of 2025. It's no secret that many companies, organizations, and individuals are still on D7 and have yet to migrate. I think we can all agree that migration, while beneficial, is not always feasible, and this is where Hero Devs comes in. Hero Devs has partnered with core team maintainers of Drupal 7 to build and maintain the Drupal 7 never-ending support product, ensuring the same quality of support that you have come to expect over the years. Drupal 7 never-ending support, or NES, allows for an effortless transition, allowing your site to remain secure, compliant, and compatible after Drupal 7 goes end of life. This allows you to migrate on your own time, or potentially not at all. Hero Devs promises to keep D7 alive and well, even offering support for the current top 100 Drupal 7 modules. If you'd like to know more about Drupal 7 never-ending support, visit herodevs.com. That's HERODEVS.com. It's been a long time since we've given an update on the show. I think it's been a couple of years. We did have the interview show with Melissa, which got into some of the more personal side of it. But I think today we're going to talk about where we have been and where we're going. You guys want to talk a little bit about some of the changes that we've had over the past couple of years?
Yeah, I'd love to. It's great to be back on the show with you guys. So there's been lots of changes over the past 2 years, right? Let's start with what's happened in the past year, because I think we've in the past talked about me leaving and show structure changes. So one of our approaches to Talking Drupal has always been small changes. We don't make big changes quickly. We make little changes over a long period of time. And we do that for a few reasons. One is we don't have a lot of time to do them. And we also, the formula is working. So we don't like to change a lot of stuff quickly. We just change it as we go along. So one of those changes we did, and I think it's over a year now, was adding guest host and module of the week correspondent. So actually, I think guest host is 2 years, right?
Yeah, I think that's about right. That feels about right.
So let's like skip that. Like guest host is working. We've had great guest hosts, right? I think it's an important part of the show to keep moving forward with, right?
Yeah.
Or do you guys want to cancel guest hosts?
No. I think guest hosts have been great. As we talked about recently, like I think it's one of the best changes we've made. We actually have 1 month without guest hosts, and they've been good shows, but I've definitely missed having a guest host and having a new person on the show.
Nick's really just saying he doesn't like just talking to me and a guest. He likes that. He likes that outside perspective.
So we also added module of the week. So Martin came in about a year and a half ago, or a little less than that. We did module of the week since the beginning of the show, probably. And then it disappeared for a few years, came back. it's been a great addition, right? Having Martin here has been awesome.
I mean, I think that's one of the best ways we could have shifted that thing. Like I find great value in the module of the week. Hopefully our listeners do too. And what people may not realize is there's a lot of mental energy that goes into module of the week, right? So prior to having Martin, one of the three of us would either have to come up with a module or we'd pick a module out of the air, right? I think we talked about that on our show with Melissa, right? We would just kind of like, oh, what's the module of the week this week? I don't know. Let's do this. But now with Martin doing it, we have an ability to have one person focus on it and kind of curate it to the topic, which I think is enhancing the value for, or at least I hope the listeners feel that it's enhancing the value for them to have a module that kind of sometimes goes along with the topic that we're talking about. So,
yeah. And he's also added a lot to the format as well. Like rather than just being like, here's the module of the week, let's talk about it. He's kind of standardized the statistics that get shared, how many people are using it, how active is it, how many issues are there, what the purpose of it is. Yeah, I mean, having Martin on has been fantastic, I think.
And when you look at the statistics for the show on YouTube anyway, because we release the module of the week also as a YouTube video, sometimes those modules of the weeks exceed the number of viewers that watch the show entirely. So there's an interest in the module of the week. So that was a good addition for us. So we also added a newsletter in the last year and a half. I think maybe it's been 2 years, but it's been something we've been sticking with. The newsletter, the intent of it was to not necessarily enhance everyone's life in getting more email, but we have listeners that find us on Spotify, find us on YouTube, but some people like to be prompted that there's a new episode by email. And this is a way to reach those people. So the newsletter basically gives you all the show content, links to the videos, gives you the show notes in one place, and also on probably 50% of the newsletters, there's unique content you can't get anywhere else. Or actually 100%, to be honest, right? Because Nick provides his minifigure of the week on the newsletter, but it's a good place to remind people and get them reconnected to the show. That's a place we could like expand the show. I guess we'll talk about that a little bit more, the content that we provide, but our newsletter stats are pretty surprising. The number of opens and reads of those newsletters, those people are very dedicated to listening to Talking Drupal.
I think my favorite thing about the newsletter is the 5 questions with each of the guest hosts. Comes out, I think, the second or third episode usually for each guest host. We give them or Stephen rather gives them a big list of questions that they can answer with a few categories, and they choose 5 of them and give a little bit of insight. And I always look forward to those myself.
Yeah, I mean, I think that overall the newsletter is a great companion to the podcast, because a lot of times we'll say like, oh, that'll be in the show notes. And if you're listening to the podcast and you're like, oh, now I got to go find the show notes. Well, those all get sent to you in the newsletter. So it's a lot easier because you can say, oh, well, I can go back to the newsletter, or I can, listen to the show with the newsletter in my inbox and go through the show notes right there. So that plus I do agree the 5 questions is very, very interesting. And the minifigures as well. I think overall it's just a great companion to the podcast.
We do give anyone who's been a guest host of the show or been involved in Talking Drupal the opportunity to put stuff into the newsletter. So sometimes you'll see inserts from previous guest hosts. I think last week we had Mike Miles, who created a little bit of content. We included it in the newsletter, and we do that. Anyone who's been involved with Talking Drupal, they get a weekly Slack message that says, hey, we've got a newsletter coming out. Do you want to include something? and sometimes they do.
Yeah, it's a great addition. By the way, I have to comment that when I thought of the idea for minifigure of the week, I thought it'd be like a small, like low effort thing to put in. And my God, like getting good pictures of things that small, getting them edited has turned out to be a lot more work than I expected. But I can batch it, so it's I think it's still around for a little while, but it's significantly more work than I expected.
Like Nick, like anything where you do like creating content and you commit to doing it for a long period of time, once the newness is over, once the honeymoon is over, it becomes work.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess that's the question. So if you like the minifigure of the week, let me know. Because I still enjoy doing it, but people aren't seeing value.
So you're asking for an out here, right?
Maybe someday. Like I said, I think I've got a good bank. I've got another set coming in that I'm pretty interested in, so I'll take some pictures of those. So I'm gonna at least another 6 months, I think, at that point. So
all right. Hey, if you want to move that to something else or get rid of it, we could always do that.
Okay, so I think the other really big change that's happened in the last few months, we haven't really talked about this yet, but other than having it just happen on the show, and that's sponsorship. So that's something that Steven had put a lot of effort into in the last probably 6 months or so behind the scenes. So let's chat about that.
What do you guys think about sponsors?
I mean, I think
so. This was not in the show notes. I'm just going to ask you guys. So
yeah,
our listeners hear it. It was something we talked about for like the show's been around for 11 years. I think we've looked at this 3 or 4 times, probably talked about it, and then pulled the trigger 6 months ago. And we have meetings, so we talk about this internally, but I'm just curious what you guys think of sponsors.
I think, we're doing our first one. We're kind of feeling it out. But I think at this point in time, I feel pretty positive about it. And I like the potential that it provides us to be able to do more. And what I mean by do more is like do more support of the Drupal community. Like, I think we're going to talk about, the plan for the income in a little bit, but I mean, I think it's going to enable us to be more supportive to the community and be able to make this more of a sustainable endeavor going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think that encapsulates a lot of my thoughts about sponsorship. Sponsorship allows you to do things that are otherwise not possible. I mean, most of my experience with sponsorship has to do with NetCamp, right? NetCamp is, we do charge for tickets, but it's almost entirely funded by sponsors. And so, the camp would never happen without sponsors. And having sponsors for Talking Drupal is going to allow us to do some things that we've not done before. It's also going to make things like hosting the show and that kind of thing a little bit easier. So I think it's worth testing out. And if you guys have thoughts, again, just like everything else, we're interested in hearing what you think about it too.
So our sponsorship came about 6 months ago. One of the reasons why I thought this was important for us was we have a reach to Drupal, to the Drupal community. And I think there's an advantage to giving. It's not about just making money. It's also about giving the opportunity for vendors to reach out to the Drupal community. And it feels like we've established over 10 years, we've established a way for people to reach the Drupal people. You'll see as we talk about in a few minutes, this is not about Nick, Steve, and John buying an island somewhere. This is really about like making the community bigger. This was a really hard decision too. And we debated it for a long time because the minute you take money from somebody, whether it's nonprofit or not, you have commitments you've made. Like, so you've had commitments to quality, commitments to consistency. And I think the changes we made to the show 2 years ago, with me getting off of it and us splitting up like some of the work, has allowed us to actually be able to deliver on a sponsorship, because we couldn't have done this 2.5 years ago. Before episode 300, we couldn't have delivered on a sponsorship. But like, I feel like we're at the point that we can actually deliver on what we would promise to somebody. So I think it was time to do it. And we'll see how it goes. Like, this is a work in process for us.
Also, if you'd like to be a sponsor on Talking Drupal, please feel free to reach out to Steven.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out too that was, you kind of hinted at it, Stephen, but that was one of the considerations too. Like, we do consistently release a show pretty much every week. We take 2 weeks off a year, and usually Stephen steps in and helps produce some content for that week off. So our listeners don't actually see that week off, but we don't actually have anything outside other than us wanting to provide content and having so much to share that compels that schedule. But once we have a sponsor that has agreed to pay for a certain number of episodes, there's some obligation there to produce that content. So that was something that we discussed, and let's talk about what the plan is for that income, because that's kind of, I think, what the biggest tipping point was for us deciding to experiment with this.
Talking Drupal private island is literally number one.
Yeah. So jokes aside, I mean, the first thing is basic expenses, right? So we host the site with a number of projects. We use a couple of tools to help us with producing the show. That's kind of the first place that the money's going. Where else are we thinking about investing this?
Ideally, income covers the basic expenses, and we've had patrons that have been supporting us for a number of years, and we still have them, and we love them, and we don't want that to go away. That didn't even really cover the basic expenses, which is fine. Having sponsors has tipped us over the point of getting past the basic expenses. So our ideal situation here for us is to take the money and improve the show in any place we can. We're trying to do that with improved quality of the content, some efficiencies on what time it takes for us to produce a show, and we'd like to give you guys a better product.
To give you guys some ideas, for example, a lot of times Stephen will will run the show through to get transcripts, right? And if I remember correctly, a lot of those tools are paid tools.
Good.
So, and some of the cheaper ones don't provide very good transcripts. So that's one area that we occasionally experiment with. There's better thumbnails, investing in better thumbnails, investing in more content, which we might talk about in a little bit.
And right now you're looking at, if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see that we're experimenting with a new production software today. So this is not a free tool. This is a paid tool. We don't know how it's going to work, but I mean, like all the things we've done over the past 10 years, we experiment, try some things, and these things cost money. But to be clear, we still consider Talking Drupal as a no-code contribution. We don't have any plans to pay anyone for their time or effort. We plan on taking the money and investing it in the show, not for time spent, but to tools and resources that we need. And that's how we've worked for 10 years and continue to do the same thing.
I'd also like to throw in there that we also do sponsor community events from time to time, right? So, once basic expenses are covered and we look at, kind of the leftovers, air quotes, leftovers, like camp sponsorships, community sponsorships are something that, I think is important to each of us. So we'll continue to do that. definitely.
And to help us kind of keep track of all of this and be transparent with each other and with the community, we decided, and I say we, but this really was a brainchild of Stephen. He put all the effort in here. We obviously, as you said, we talked about it, we collectively decided, but Stephen's the one that put the effort in for this. But we're using Open Collective for this. So there's now a Talking Drupal Open Collective. And there were a bunch of benefits. I think we've talked about Open Collective here and there in the show. I know Jacob Rockowitz uses it for web form. But one of the primary benefits for us too is that it allows us to get a nonprofit fiscal sponsor. There's a lot of other benefits for Open Collective. What else made you decide to use them, Stephen?
So there were like 3 things in my mind that were important, and the 3 of us discussed these. Is like we wanted a nonprofit status, like having Talking Drupal coming through Stephen's like personal bank account and stuff. At some point that needed to end. Yeah, not big bucks going through here, so it was not like a real tax issue or anything. But if the show is going to grow, it needed to kind of go to that step. And transparency, like where if someone's giving money, where is it going? That was important. And the next factor for us was we don't really want to spend a lot of time managing money and figuring out. We want to create content, right? We don't want to spend a lot of time moving money between accounts and doing all that kind of stuff. So those are the 3 things that we were considering when we chose Open Collective. And I'm not sure that worked out so well so far, but.
To be clear, the last one, because it is transparent and they are a nonprofit fiscal sponsor. But so there have been some challenges with Open Collective that we didn't foresee. What were some of those challenges? Because I know that you spent a significant amount of time trying to overcome these.
Yeah, the first and the biggest one in my mind was when you go to Open Collective, the documentation was pretty clear that you could integrate with third parties, like our Patreons. Income that comes in could get flowed through over to Open Collective, so it could be easily managed. And we do have a merchandising store that no one knows about because we've never published it.
Until now.
Well, only because of this reason that we were kind of waiting to like have this money funnel into some place. Because when you start to see our merchandise, it's going to blow up. Like people are going to be spending so much money on it, right? But we thought this was going to work, and maybe it was my mistake. The documentation was very clear that we could integrate directly, but it turns out that it did not work out the way you wanted it to. Go ahead.
So just to clarify, basically, instead of Patreon money and the merch store money going directly to Open Collective, we need to withdraw the money from those services manually and then deposit it into Open Collective manually and tag it with, this is Patreon, this is the store. And you have to do that once a month, once a quarter, once a week, however often, but it's not direct. And
then it still needs to flow through a personal account or some other nonprofit account that you create. Right.
Which is what we were trying to avoid. And the piece that wasn't documented super well, I think, is that feature depends on the fiscal sponsor that you choose. And Open Collective and the fiscal sponsors don't have an index of those types of features that they support. So it's not like you can just make sure you choose one that has that feature. You have to kind of personally email each one and find out what features they support and then apply for sponsorship from them. And so that's what the gap was. They do technically support that feature, but only a very small subset of the sponsors do. And they don't expose a way to find out which ones do and which ones don't.
Yeah, and there is not currently a US-based fiscal sponsor that can provide the needs we have. So we're in a position of we've met the first few goals, which was transparency and nonprofit, but the ease of money transfer is still a little bit of a challenge.
But there's another significant thing that I got an email on recently, and this was the other side of it, and that's money going out of Open Collective. So as we mentioned, there's some ongoing expenses for the show, for hosting and for certain services that we use and things like that. And again, with Open Collective, if you pay a fee or something, you can get reimbursed for that.
Yeah.
But with virtual credit cards, you don't have to have that in between person. You could just set up a virtual card, and then Libsyn, which is our hosting service, can just charge that card directly instead of one of us having to pay it and then create an invoice with Open Collective. And as of late last year, Stripe canceled all virtual cards for Open Collective. So they are actually internally apparently looking for a new provider that will give that feature. But that's a second blow. And we're just trying to share and be open, because if other people think of Open Collective, these are things that you might consider. But obviously, us needing to make requests through Open Collective isn't, it's a time burden. It's not a huge thing. It's just, it would be really nice if money could go directly into Open Collective and then pay the services directly. But as we said, the two primary things we were looking for were nonprofit coverage and transparency with the community. So we've had some changes in content. What do you guys think about that?
So I have a question. So I'm not in the weekly production of the show any longer. Haven't been for a while. So John, this question is to you. Do you have a shortage of content?
No, I think the Drupal community has been very, very good to share their content and knowledge with us. And anytime we've asked somebody to come on the show and share content, share knowledge, they've accepted. So no, I don't know that there's a shortage of content.
So how do you select content? Let me ask that question too.
So I have a big content tub, and I put tickets in it, and I put my hand in there and I pull a ticket out, and I just no. So the way this typically happens is it's pretty ad hoc. And what I mean by that is I'll go to a conference, I'll listen to something online, I'll see a tweet, I'll see a blog post. Basically, as I walk through my day and life, I am picking up on people sharing interesting pieces of content in the Drupal space. If I think it's a good show material, I will reach out to them and see if they're interested, and then I'll put them on the calendar. Right. Sometimes people reach out to us. That's always nice. Sometimes I'll have a conversation with somebody, and just like in that conversation, I'll go, this would be an interesting show topic. And, and then I find a subject matter expert and we turn it into a show. So there are quite a few different ways that we kind of curate content and select it.
How could someone get on the show if they had something they wanted to talk about? Is there how do we break the John barrier to reach out to him and make that happen?
So, I mean, the easiest thing to do is, jump into Drupal Slack and, ping me there, could send an email, could reach out. People have reached out to Steven in the past. People have reached out to Nick in the past. So it's not really like you got to reach out to me. You can just kind of get in contact through those methods and say, hey, I have an idea for a show. What do you think? And then, I may be, admittedly, there are a few people that may or may not be listening to this right now. They go like, listen, I reached out to that guy a couple of weeks ago. He hasn't gotten back to me yet. I will get back to you. And it may not be immediate as you might like, but I will get back to you, and we will schedule something if it makes sense.
Hey, John,
and if it's been been a long time, feel free to reach out again, because we did just recently switch email servers. And so it's possible that a couple might have gotten
That's definitely
dropped.
true. Like if it's been like 3 weeks and I haven't gotten back to you, at least to say like, hey, let me think about this. Reach out again because nobody's perfect, and I will not get upset if you reach out to me multiple times on your topic, especially if I haven't said replied to you in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, that's completely fair. So John, where would they reach out to you?
You can
Drupal
like
Slack.
I said,
You said Drupal Slack.
Drupal Slack's a good one. You could email me at john@talkingdrupal.com too. That's that one. That one will work.
So one other question here before we leave. Is there any criteria you have that you would consider someone being on the show or not? I guess not being on the show is a good criteria too. Do you have any thoughts about that?
So, I mean, I think it depends. So there are two forms in which somebody usually suggests a show, right? Like, hey, this would be a great idea for a show. And, and then they kind of leave it there, which isn't overly helpful for me personally, because like, if you have an idea for a show, like I would like to see like a little bit of a sales pitch, maybe a little bit of an outline of what you think that show would be about. And most importantly for me, like who would you like to hear, right? Because you don't want to hear me talk about this stuff. So I think like when you're suggesting a show, that's important. I think if you're going to be on the show and you want to say like, hey, I'm a subject matter, I want to talk about this, then, here's again, an outline. So an outline in both cases. Right. And then I think part of it for me is just some examples of you like public speaking, whether it's giving a talk at a conference or maybe you have a video online, you've done a webinar or something. I think that's helpful. Just so we can, ensure that, the quality is going to be where we want it to be.
But newcomers are totally welcome.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll, Nick's really great at helping folks with their audio and making sure that, they got the right stuff that they need to be successful from a audio quality, video quality standpoint. And we'll definitely help. When I say an outline, it doesn't have to be like an essay. It could literally be like four or five bullet points. Hey, I'd like to talk about X, Y, and Z. Okay. Well, we can work on that. Right. But yeah, just a little bit of something. So that way I can get an idea of like, yes, this would be a good show, or, well, there isn't really a lot here. Right. Because we like to try to fill, at least an hour if possible.
We are interested in talking Drupal for new content for the show. We've started to explore those at the end of last year, and we have some new stuff coming up. We can't announce them today based on the schedule and the meetings that are happening, which is great. That's fine.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned. But maybe let's switch this to our listeners are the most important people that we want to create content for. So if you're a listener, and you are, if you're hearing me right now, are there things you're interested in learning about? Are there shows that you think could be valuable? Reach out to us. And we've had one of our listeners do that in the last few weeks, and we're in talks about maybe creating some new content related to that. I guess that's probably the best way to position this. And It could be like, it could be the types of content that we'd be looking for is, we mentioned earlier, we have a newsletter that comes out weekly with very dedicated people who open it. If you want to put a blog post in there or some content in there to reach Drupal people, like send that over to us.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I would go out on a limb there to say like, we're not looking for salesy pitchy content. So just be aware of that when you're when you're, and that's not to say if you're, suggesting a product or think there's a product or service that we should be aware of, like, that's kind of different than just a wholesale sales pitch to, a captive audience. So just be aware of that.
John, as we've discussed earlier, we have an avenue for those people who would like to pitch a product.
Yeah,
it's true.
Yeah, that's right.
You too can be a sponsor of Talking Drupal. Reach out to Steven at
talkingdrupal.com. we can finish that email address. Yeah. So yeah, if you have ideas for new content that you'd like to see too, or you have thoughts about the show, like, yeah, you can always reach out to us on the Drupal Slack, Talking Drupal channel is the best way to reach us as always. Feel free to send a private message or email John or Steven. I think I'm the only one that doesn't have an email because I don't need one, but you can find my email. It's out there. So yeah, looking forward to the new year when we can announce it, which might be in the next week or two. Apparently not today, but yeah, we have a couple of things that we're talking about that I think will be kind of exciting. And then
before you leave there, I'd also like to mention that the platform is growing. So, and Nick, you can probably talk to this better than I can, but the YouTube sponsors and the YouTube subscribers, the Audible listeners, it's growing every single month, right? And has never stopped.
Yeah, we've got some good organic growth, and we've got a great community that listens to the show, and we've been growing. So if you have thoughts, we'd love to hear from you. And like I said, the best way to kind of interact with us as hosts or the rest of the community is the Drupal Slack. We've got I think at this point about 250 people in that Slack channel. So if you want to throw something out to the community, that's the best place to take part. Okay, and then we've got one final goal at the moment. Like we never stop looking at ways to improve the show, but at the moment we've got one other big goal for 2024, and that has to do with recording and post-production.
Yeah, so this is a strange one for us because the three people you're looking at on the screen, if you're on YouTube right now, are the people who've produced the show for 11 years. And for us to move to the next level with adding new shows, I think it'd be great for us to have some additional folks that would be interested in helping us produce this show. So we're interested in people who are interested in doing non-code contributions for Talking Drupal. We're looking for post-production, maybe some asset generation, content creation. If you're interested in helping produce this show in some way, reach out to us. It's nothing we've ever asked for or looked for, but it seems like something that's appropriate at this point in time to make us move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think Talking Drupal to me has always been, obviously a passion project for all of us, and I think it's really been for the benefit of the community, right? And it's really been an open source effort, right? And I think it's taken 10 years to get to this point, but I think we're getting to the point now where we have the ability to open source it a little bit more and get new people in to kind of help with some of this stuff. And as Steven said, there's plenty of non-code contribution because there isn't really a lot of code that we write to produce a podcast, but there's plenty of opportunities for that. So really interested in seeing how we can kind of grow the community around Talking Drupal.
Yeah, and I think some of the content that we are not announcing today is a good test bed for some of the stuff if somebody's interested. And I think some of it too can be, if you're interested in, you have a little bit of technical chops and just have been interested in like video production or that kind of thing. Like this is the kind of place where you can try it out and see if it's something that you enjoy.
I would also say that I've heard of a couple other folks being, starting podcasts and, I don't know. This could be a good place to learn how, well, not to toot our own horns here, but like a relatively successful long running podcast, kind of operates, right? Come in, learn from us based on what we do, help out a little bit. And then, if you want to go do your own thing, go ahead and do your own thing. If you want to, pitch it as a piece of new content, maybe that's something that's interesting to us. But at the end of the day, I think it's all about the community, as is with Drupal, right? It's all about the community. It's all about, producing content for that community. So.
Yeah. And back to content a little bit is, if you have an idea for content that you think the community would love, but you don't know how to record it, you don't know how to produce it, you don't know how to deliver it, it could be a place that we could help you out.
Well, Stephen, thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure when you can be back on the show in one of the host seats. Glad you could join us.
Yeah, it's always fun to talk to you guys on camera, because we do a lot of it off camera, so it's fun.
Do you have questions or feedback? Reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal, or by email at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/tdpromo.
Get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest hosts, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing the Become a Patron button. All right. So if our listeners want to get in touch with you, Stephen, what's the best way for them to do that?
StephenCross.com with a PH.
And John, how about you?
You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. And you can find out more about EPAM at EPAM.com.
And you can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.
Thanks, everyone.
See you guys next week.